Okay, so that is Vivaldi. Now, it is very interesting that, as I said, all his works were written for the girls of the Pieta, and people flocked from everywhere to listen to these girls playing. And of course, it was not only at the Pieta, there were brilliant soloists and also ensembles at the other three ospedali. Okay, now I will read you another quotation from a contemporary account. Let me just see. Linksboer. Yes, this is what Kendall, this is the book that from which I get all my facts, Alan Kendall. This is the illustrated edition. There's also a plain book with the same contents but without all the photos and illustrations that you could consult. He said, that this is now, he's talking about the girls of the Pieta. For these performers and for this public, some of Vivaldi's finest music was written. He made the girls' orchestra into one of the best in the world. But even more important than this, and this is where our harmony and counterpoint angle comes in, it inspired Vivaldi to do some of his most daring experiments with form and instrumentation, with far-reaching implications for the development of Western music. One of your assignments will be precisely this. His most famous work, from an instrumental point of view, it's not perhaps the most well-known work, but the most famous in the sense that it had the greatest influence on the further development of Western music and also on the development of certain genres, was his L'estro, which means the harmonic inspiration, L'estro armonico, opus 3. Now, you have to listen carefully. It is very clear that this opus 3, consisting of 12 works, was put together after he had written, over a period of time, 12 concertos for the girl or girls who were soloists in the Pieta and whom he was teaching. So those 12 concertos are in 4 sets. Every set consists of a concerto for 4 violins, then a concerto for 2 violins, and then a concerto for 1 violin. And again, so the second set again, 4, 2, 1, third set, 4. So that means concertos number 1, 4, 7, and 10 were written for 4 violins. Concertos 2, 5, 8, and 11 for 2 violins, and concertos 3, 6, 9, and 12 for 1 violin. They are beautiful, beautiful concertos. Your next assignment will be to listen to the concerto for 1 violin, opus 3, number 9, only the first movement, which is about 2 minutes. Why? Because that is very clearly the very first concerto that he ever wrote for those girls. And most of those girls that he had as pupils, with the cello players and possibly a double bass player, most of them were still only just beyond a beginner's standard. If you look at the orchestra parts, any person who was in a good grade 1 standard can play it. Even the solo part is not beyond grade 3 standard. It never goes, it stays in first position all the time. The note values are never too fast or too slow, and it's only the first and the second finger positions that are used. So it is very clear that that was his first concerto. You can actually trace the development of the girls in their own playing standard, and also the development of the standard of the orchestra if you try to put those 12 concertos in the order of learning. Now, of course, another thing what is special, if you listen to these concertos, you must imagine in your mind, for example, opus 3 number 9, the easiest one, the most accessible, it was probably Michieletta or Chiaretta, either one of those two, who were the very first ones to ever play that concerto, and they were accompanied by their mates, by their fellow residents in the Pieta, which is a very moving thought. His 4 seasons were written for Michieletta. she and or Chiaretta were the very first performance of his Four Seasons, just like all his other concertos. And that is one of the reasons why Vivaldi's concertos have such variety. There's almost no combination of instruments that you wouldn't find playing as soloists together with an orchestra. And he was able to do that because the girls received tuition in any possible instrument. Timpani, organ, double bass, you name it. So he had all these girls at his disposal and all these combination possibilities thanks to the standard of playing. So it's actually amazing if one goes to a catalogue of his works to see the variety of different solo instruments that he combined at times. Obviously, at some stage, he must have had 4 girls that were very good or equally good, because his very, very first concerto in the collection, Opus 3, so in other words, Opus 3 number 1 in D major for 4 violins. Again, you only need to be on about grade 3 to 4 standard to be able to play it well. It only goes into 3rd position, not any higher. But it's a wonderful, beautiful, inspiring work to hear. So that's another concerto that you could really listen to. And again, the movements are very short. Opus 3 number 2 for 2 violins in G minor is another very, very beautiful concerto. Do yourself a favor and listen to it. And imagine, certainly it was Michaeletta and Chiaretta who would have been the 2 soloists. Last thing about L'Esto Armonico, in many of these concertos, there's also a very important solo cello part. So it's very clear that at some stage, and quite soon, Vivaldi also had a very good cello pupil for whom he was able to give advanced solo bits to play with the solo violins. Right, that's that. Now, just a few interesting facts. Vivaldi always had to be reappointed. Now, very interesting, we still have today the minutes of the governing body of the Pieta. For example, the one on 5 August 1735. So it's next week it'll be 285 years, where they decided to again reappoint him. And this is what they say about him. Now remember, 1735 is 30 years after his first appointment. But they had the system of always re-evaluating the teachers. And by the way, the girls also had to give evaluations about their teachers to the governing body. So that also played a role in whether the teacher got appointed or reappointed or not, whatever the girls said. Another interesting thing is, obviously, they were never allowed to be taught by a male teacher in the absence of anybody else. So there was always a chaperone present when any girl received a lesson from a male person. And now that was 300, 400 years ago. And today we are back to the system of safeguarding. Safeguarding is not a new thing. It's a very old thing, and of course a very good thing. Right, so this is what the minutes say about Vivaldi and his reappointment. So they refer to Vivaldi and they say the following. A teacher very capable of assuming this function. This is now the concert master, which means the person in charge of all the concerts and the compositions, etc. A teacher very capable of assuming this function. The same maestro will have to provide for our girls concertos and other compositions for all sorts of instruments. And he will have to come with the assiduousness necessary for instructing the girls and making them well able to perform them. And then they end and they say now his salary will be raised to 100 ducats per year. So that's slightly more than 8 ducats per month, not 5 anymore. Okay. I want to conclude, and then I will just have a little story to tell, a very poignant story, which is also very relevant, but which most people don't know. But I will conclude with another excerpt from a traveling journal by Charles de Brosse. I mentioned him earlier, when he was actually the president of the Parliament of Burgundy. So he was a very important French official. And he wrote this account in a letter home, what he said. He says, the transcendent music, in other words, music that goes beyond this earth. The transcendent music here is that of the hospitals. There are 4 of them, all consisting of bastard girls or orphans. They are brought up at the expense of the state, and they are trained only to excel in music. They also sing like angels and play the violin, the flute, the organ, the oboe, the cello, the bassoon. In short, there is no instrument so large that it makes them afraid of it. They are cloistered in the manner of nuns. They alone perform, and each concert consists of about 40 girls. I swear to you, that's a very strong expression in French, je vous jure, I swear to you that there is nothing more pleasing than to see a pretty young nun in a white habit with a spray of pomegranate flowers behind her ear, conducting the orchestra and beating time with all the grace and precision imaginable. Moving words. You must please make me a short summary of the lecture that you've just heard. More important for me is that this will change the way that you listen to any work by Vivaldi. It totally changed my whole experience of listening to Vivaldi when I for the first time learned about his background and his work at the Pieta, that all the works that he composed were for those girls. In fact, I have a little pet theory. If one listens to the 4 seasons, all we know the Vivaldi, the 4 seasons are by Vivaldi. But if you really listen objectively, the 4 seasons are totally unlike any other of his concertos that he had written. And he wrote almost 600 concertos. They don't have the same kind of themes and harmonic progressions and structure that all these other concertos have. I have the fanciful idea that these 4 seasons were actually written by Michieletta or by Chiaretta. Okay, last story, true story. I said that most composers saw their main pursuit in the Baroque Italy as composing opera. Now, Vivaldi had quite a decent income from his operas. He was quite well known for his operas in his own time, but then he started having financial troubles. So what he tried to do then, he went on a tour of Europe to see if he couldn't sell one of his operas in order to get it staged in one of the other cities for the income that it would generate. He ended in Vienna, not Venice, Vienna, and there he contracted an illness. We know that he had a problem with asthma or something, but he had lung problems, and he died there. He died there basically penniless and with nobody around him. Nobody that he knew, or family or friends. He received a pauper's burial, so he was just anonymously dumped in the pauper's cemetery in Vienna in 1741. Now, does that ring a bell? Exactly 50 years later, that was what happened with Mozart. He was also suffering financial problems. He was desperately trying to stage one of his operas to generate an income. He died, received a pauper's burial, and was buried in 1791, exactly 50 years after Vivaldi. And it's actually mind-boggling to think that these 2 great composers might be lying anonymously, not far from each other, in one of those paupers' churchyards in Vienna. With that, I'm finished. Next installment or next lecture, I will still keep you posted. Okay, bye.